warm and friendly hello. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family podcast. We've got a great podcast for you. We've got a two-part conversation today with one of our good friends, Rocco Miller, who does such amazing work over at Bracketeer.org. He's going to be joining me. We've got to talk a little bit about what we did see with UNLV and if we might be seeing a little bit of something similar in college basketball. And Rocco is actually going to mention a few examples of where we have seen this in college basketball, where you do want to be taking note of this and why mid-majors are a little bit more prone to this rather than the power conferences. We've been hearing that from quite a few people, and I don't want to dwell on it. I don't want to be just diving into it overly much because this is a sports betting podcast. This is all about making money, and a lot of this is not going to be applying too much like futures, what have you, but this is something that is becoming a part of college basketball. I feel like I'd be doing a disservice to not talk about that, and a little bit about the Mountain West, the landscape out there, and a lot of teams are going to the Pac-12. We're going to be talking a little bit about that in part one of this chat with Rocco, and then in part two, we're going to be looking more at these mid-majors out in the, shall we say, western part of the country. We're going to be taking a little bit of a look at the Big Sky. We're going to be taking a little bit of a look at the Big West. I know that he's going to be bringing up the Horizon League in terms of teams that he's feeling bullish and bearish on coming into the upcoming season. So going to be a nice wide-ranging chat with Rocco here today. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, please do subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And I do want to know what you want to hear on this podcast because we're about 5.5 weeks from the start of the college basketball season. I'm down to just 4 conference previews to do: the Big East, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and also the SEC. And I'm going to be doing about one a week to be able to get those all polished off. But I do want to know in the meantime, in the other episodes, what you do want to hear. So that way I can best get you set for the upcoming season. And you've got one or two ways to be able to fire in these questions, comments, topic ideas, what have you. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And did not get in any of those Twitter/X questions today, so please jump on that and please do fire those in. But in the meantime, we've got ourselves a great chat today as we are being joined by Rocco Miller, a guy that I absolutely love. He does great work over at Bracketeer.org. He is the scheduling guru. Most of these schedules for these teams are already taken care of. There are a few that are still hanging out there in the balance. He does a great job of setting up these teams with non-conference opponents. He does a great job of helping these teams out with regards to their scheduling. He travels all across the country throughout the year looking at so many different teams as well. His work ethic and the way that he covers college basketball is tireless. I absolutely love it. You're able to follow all of his work over on Twitter/X at Rocco Miller, his first and last name, the number 8 altogether. And Rocco, always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Greg, thank you. It's always good to be on with you. Happy Thursday night is when we're recording this. We know as we speak, we're still trying to figure out what's going to happen in the beloved Pac-12. Although we have said our goodbyes to most of our schools, the Cougars and Beavers still hanging on by a thread and trying to make it a better league, for what they have to work with. But it feels a little bit like Saved by the Bell, doesn't it? Where we all fell in love with the original cast of characters, then they tried to sell us on the new class. I don't know if it's going to work. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be a little bit rough because it almost feels like it's going to be the Mountain Pack because you've got Washington State and Oregon State and a bunch of Mountain West teams that are going to be coming along. And I'm not sure how you take a look at this, but I feel like this could honestly be a little bit of a better basketball conference rather than a football conference. So Washington State and Oregon State, I would say that they're stronger on the football side of things. The teams that they have brought in thus far, like Boise State, they're obviously pretty rock solid at both, but San Diego State has very much become a rock solid basketball school as well. Fresno State, it feels like they're just falling on some tough times in general. I have my question marks with them coming into the upcoming season, but with them trying to make a play for Gonzaga, which I don't think is going to work out, I do feel like there has been quite a bit more emphasis with this new pack rather than a lot of these other conferences to try to bring in basketball schools.
Yeah, no, in all seriousness, I think the floor has been raised, if you will, in terms of if you compare these 7 that they have, which to recap are of course, the Cougars and Beavers, along with Boise State, San Diego State, Utah State, Colorado State, and Fresno State. I think the floor has certainly been raised. I think that's clear compared to where if Washington State University and Oregon State University would have just joined the existing Mountain West. I think by avoiding, and again, this is a basketball point of view here, and nothing against these schools, I love them all, but by avoiding Air Force, San Jose State, historically, usually pretty down low in the bottom of the national rankings, let alone the conference. And then as well, sometimes Wyoming. We love it when Wyoming's good, but there's years where they're 250 plus as well. They don't have that danger anymore. They'll, like you mentioned briefly there, Fresno State's going through a transition. You would think, they're well resourced. And of course, football wise, Fresno adds quite a bit to the table. So I like the way they've gone about it, just from the standpoint of they'll have a stronger league as a whole by really not having too many easy pickings in the league, if you will. Now, what they do with this last spot or two, and if they can get Gonzaga, like you said, that ship may have sailed, but there's still an opportunity to make this an even better basketball league. I do think the decision will be football based, but if you had an opportunity to combine San Diego State with Gonzaga and then bring in, maybe there's another spot for a St. Mary's, right? You could still make this even better. Now, I think the original interest from Gonzaga probably was affiliated with having both San Diego State and Memphis. That's all speculation. So I'm not sure, what you can do there unless you brought in a Grand Canyon, but Grand Canyon doesn't have football either. So we're really, from a basketball standpoint, a little stuck. And I'm curious to see, because I feel like the teams left out there, Mountain West just got a recommitment from UNLV and Air Force, which also provided a recommitment from Hawaii in football. And then we'll see what happens with Hawaii's basketball program, but also with Wyoming and New Mexico, Nevada, two strong programs there. They both need to add one or two. UTEP, New Mexico State combo is kind of a no-brainer for either one of them. We'll see if that goes the Pax way or Mountain West way. And then I think you got to go after Texas, like we talked about last time I was on. There's Texas State's kind of obvious for football with Sam Houston, but you're really at a point now where you can't get any of the American teams because they've all re-upped. You're down to Conference USA or Sun Belt teams. So does that open up the door to like Louisiana Lafayette? Do you go all the way to Atlanta and grab a Georgia State? Like, some of this stuff is just maybe a little too far-fetched. I'm really curious to see how it lands.
Yep, I am very curious to see how everything is going to be going as well. And one of those teams that was discussed in terms of perhaps being one of those teams in the pack, though it looks like they're going to be staying in the Mountain West for now. That it's as of right now, that could be changing 24 hours from now, but that'd be UNLV. And this is obviously not a football podcast. This is a college basketball podcast. But as we know, college sports is all interlinked in some way. And we've seen what has happened in terms of quarterback situation at UNLV with, I believe it's Matthew Sluka, who decided that he's going to redshirt this season after he was guaranteed $100,000. It sounded like things were not paid. And the big question that I have in terms of this podcast, Rocco, is do you think that this could be something that happens in college basketball? And do you think that this is more stuff that we're going to be seeing more at the mid-major level? Or do you think that this could happen at a power conference as well?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more common in mid-major. We've actually already experienced it. I feel like basketball is a little bit ahead of football in this area because in basketball, the payment and what the player is worth is so much more pronounced. In football, in the NFL, you have a 53-man roster. I think in college, you have an 85 scholarship roster. And so it's hard to spread those dollars around. In hoops, it's pretty obvious. If you're Great Osabor up at Washington, there's a premium on big men, and that's why he's getting paid what he's getting paid or what he's rumored to be getting paid. Even when you're a Greg Gordon last year, the dominant minutes player and clear kind of lead scorer for Iona, he just abruptly left the team on February 18th after the game against St. Peter's. Never to be heard from again, and now he's resurfaced in the American Conference here this year. We've already been seeing it. A lot of it kind of goes under the radar, like a Greg Gordon, but he's a perfect example of this from last year. We've seen situations at places like Memphis where guys will quit the team. A team like USC this coming season is a team to keep your eye on because they've got 11 mouths to feed. 11 different guys averaged double figures last year at Division I, either power schools or very good programs. And by the time we get to January, there's only going to be 8 or 9 rotation spots. So don't you think a couple of those guys are going to be a little unhappy and might just take off early? Yeah, of course that's possible. Yeah, it's certainly going to be around in basketball. However, in basketball, I would hope maybe the collectives, especially at the power conference level, to answer that question, are a little more mature to where, there's not like a hold up in the middle of the season. Like, hey, we're off to a 9-0 start. I need another $100,000. Where's it at? Or I'm not playing. You would hope that doesn't happen. But in terms of guys wanting to maybe save an extra year of eligibility or not really seeing the future with the school and abruptly leaving, we've already seen that.
Yeah, we certainly have. And it is so interesting to just take a look at this landscape in college sports as it's an evolving one. And we don't want to be going back to the time when guys were getting suspended for getting peanut butter with their bagel for lunch and everything like that. And at the same time, certainly it is a little bit of the Wild West as well. So trying to be able to find a spot between A and B, I think is going to be so important moving forward. And it is a part of the landscape that we've got right now is Rocco Miller, who does great work over at Bracketeer.org. He does an amazing job looking at this landscape. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I think that this is a good launching point for part number 2, where we dive in a little bit more on these teams. We're going to be talking with Rocco about some of the West Coast teams that he's feeling bullish on in terms of mid-majors. I take a look at that landscape, and I know that he's going to riff on a Horizon League team or two that he likes as well. That's on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Rocco Miller. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Rocco Miller, and then the number 8 altogether. He does great work over at Bracketeer.org. And Rocco, we talked a little bit in the first part, a little bit more about the stuff that happens off the field, off the court, in terms of conference realignment, in terms of the NIL stuff that has been lingering in the wake of the UNLV football situation. Now let's get down to brass tacks. Let's take a look at what we're going to be getting out there on the hardwood this season, especially with some of these mid-majors. As I know you've been a big fan of Grand Canyon, and that's a team I think should be able to run the WAC, but how do you take a look at some of these other mid-majors? Like, I think that things out there in the Big West are very open this year with a likely bounce-back year for UC Santa Barbara. I just take a look at that Big Sky Conference as well, and I'm not sure how you feel about that Big Sky, but I feel like that is going to be one of the more intriguing mid-majors in all of college basketball, one where home court advantage with all the travel in that conference is, in my opinion, going to reign supreme.
Oh, yeah. The travel's always extreme. You're navigating the dead of winter through places like Montana and
Greeley, Colorado.
Greeley, Colorado, Flagstaff, Arizona. I mean, the list goes on and on. Sacramento and Portland are much more pleasant, but they're hard to get to if you have to come from places like Greeley, Colorado, right? So, yeah, I think the Big Sky is unfortunately down a little bit as a whole. We had the pleasure of a pro there with Dylan Jones in the past few years and the delight of a young phenom head coach, David Riley at Eastern Washington. Obviously a legend now coming in with Monson, but you know, they got to reload, and we'll see how Eastern can do. A lot of unknowns on their roster this year. And then you look at a place like Idaho. I think maybe they're finally ready to make that move. They've been reinvesting into all athletics. You know, if you're paying any attention to Big Sky football, you'll see that Idaho gave Oregon a scare in week 1. And I think they're number 3 right now in the national rankings. But I think in general, there's been a resurgence and investment. The new arena for basketball opened a couple of years ago. It looks unbelievably beautiful when you watch a Vandal home game. And now they've finally got some talent to back it up. You know, right now in the Torvik, they're actually coming in the top 3 in the league. I think that's fascinating because this has been a rebuild from the very bottom of Division I. But now they have 5 key returners that played significant minutes last year, led by Julius Mims and Tyler Russ. A nice transfer from, and this kind of tells you, like, if you want to see where guys are going in the transfer portal, and you want to connect the dots to financials, take no further look than Colton Mitchell, who was a key player for Idaho State, you know, last year as a redshirt freshman. And he's going to come straight over to Idaho, the rival, probably getting a couple extra dollars to do so. But he inserts nicely there as the new point guard for the Vandals. So anyway, yeah, there's a lot going on there. We'll probably see some big surprises in a league like this. Montana is very steady. They look tough. Yeah, and I think Weber State's got a chance to have the best defense. So there's a lot of different variables at stake. When in doubt, my projections typically lean towards coaching and defense first, and offense is kind of third on my list. So as I go to make some final calls here, that's how I'll approach them and every other league. And I heard you mention the WAC, Greg. The Grand Canyon thing is well publicized. They're getting well-deserved hype, but I think the league is so much deeper than people want to give it credit for. I think it's pretty easy to put a bracket together and project Grand Canyon, but you got to realize all these March tournaments are one and dones, and it's very possible they could lose to a very talented UT Arlington team, a team I'm very high on that's got a great chance to crack the top 100 by the end of the year in Ken Palm and whatnot in the net. You also have Seattle University, who's on their way to the WCC. Very well invested program. You know, they lose their star from last year, but they're going to be very solid, and they've reloaded in some key areas. So watch out for Seattle University. And then Cal Baptist, another well-resourced school. Abilene Christian, another well-resourced school. These teams are not going to be backing down. And Utah Valley still, you know, got a fighting chance to steal a bid. So I think the WAC tournament and the WAC season race will be interesting when Grand Canyon goes to those 5 buildings, they're not going to have an easy time.
Oh, they are not going to. And I think that it is so interesting to look at the landscape of so many of these mid-majors because I'm not sure what your sense is coming into the season because there are a few demonstrative favorites like McNeese out there in the Southland. If they're not number one in your projector or finish, I'd be a little bit surprised there, even with the addition of Stephen F. Austin late. Obviously, Gonzaga when it comes to the WCC, but it just feels like this year, other than a few select conferences, there doesn't seem to be that one super demonstrative favorite. Like even a conference like the Patriot League, I was talking about them a few days ago. Typically, you would just default to Colgate being number one, and I'm not so sure I'm able to do that with them anymore because they do lose so much. And it feels like in a lot of these mid-major conferences, there's going to be a lot of teams that perhaps win their conference with 3+ losses. And I think that there's going to be a lot of great races with these mid-major conferences.
Yeah, I think they're pretty much all up for grabs. I agree with the Patriot League. I'm tempted to put like a Bucknell in there who has an up-and-coming program. I've met with Coach Griffin several times throughout the offseason and excited about where they're going. Exciting the way they scheduled too, just adding a home and home with Princeton and others. It's an impressive schedule. They're actually going to come out to Gonzaga right before the holidays. They're really testing themselves. And I think there's something to that. When you test yourself the way Bucknell's set up to here this year, you're only going to learn more and more about your team and be tougher in a league like that. Colgate and Coach Matt over there, he is just a tremendous coach. So their system is still really tough to beat. But I think Bucknell and Lehigh's got a good nucleus back. I think so does American. It's going to be a good race out there. Everywhere else as well, like you can pick any league you want. High Point is a good example. Like they're incredibly athletic, incredibly loaded, incredibly deep resources coming out the wazoo there, but like they still got to go out and prove it. Longwood's got a scrappy team. You've got some other quality clubs in that league like UNC Asheville. They're not going to be an easy out either. So even when you have a distinct advantage like a McNeese, like a High Point, you're still going to have to go out and prove it and earn it. And that's why we love it.
Yep, that is why we love it. And it's going to be so much fun to take a look at some of those conferences this season as Rocco Miller does such great work over at Bracketeer.org. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I recall when you joined me a few weeks ago, you were talking about you're starting to do your bracketology for the upcoming season. You were diving in on a few schools, like I know that you were mentioning Ball State as perhaps a team that was a little bit on your radar over the last few weeks as you've been doing a little bit more of your research, as you're starting to put things together for your preseason bracketology, because this is when you can really give a little bit more of your opinion rather than a little bit more during the season where you're trying to mimic what the committee is going to be doing. Has there been a few other teams that have been popping up that you're saying, man, why are we leaving this team for dead for so much? And they're just really a team that you feel like is being slept upon a little bit.
I'm curious to what the popular opinions are in the Horizon League. I'm just extremely impressed with all the veterans and just players I've come to respect, like Themis Folks and AJ McGee and Eric Pratt, leading Milwaukee in the Horizon League. You could argue their top 6 rotation guys are all seniors. Actually, their top 7, followed by 3 potential juniors behind that. This Bart Lundy team, and I've always loved the way Bart coaches, is definitely in a place to break through this year, in my opinion. Obviously, you got to contend with great zone defenses and scrappy play of Northern Kentucky. Purdue Fort Wayne has Rasheed Bello, a guy I love tremendously, and other good pieces back as well. Oakland's Oakland, and Wright State's not going to really drop off either, even though Clint is in his first year there as head coach. I think the Horizon's going to be a hell of a league, but I'm having a hard time not taking Milwaukee. I haven't exactly seen that everywhere, and I know that's your home area, Greg, so I had to give them a shout out. Yeah. Over in the Sun Belt, I think it's just going to be an amazingly incredible competition. Arkansas State's getting some well-deserved love. Troy is extremely well coached. James Madison will be very well coached. And I got my eye on a little bit of a deeper sleeper is Georgia Southern. And the reason why is if you followed them last year, they got off to an incredibly rough start and really just never gave up. Charlie Henry was in his first year figuring things out. He's hired a great staff. Maurice Spates is on the staff, for example, who's just one of the elite recruiters in the region, and working at a Sunbelt school like this. That's a big deal for Georgia Southern. And I'm just curious, I think right now they're projected somewhere around 8th or 9th in the league. But the Sun Belt, the margins are so narrow. I could see a school like this with a bright coach. Charlie Henry has a bunch of great accolades coming into this job from Alabama as an X's and O's game plan strategist, plays analytical basketball, all positionless, all the things you like out of a lot of these younger coaches. He's got it. And they've got some talent now with Aaron Banks and Eugene Brown III and Bradley Douglas and Avante Parker. There's a good list of guys here ready to compete and contribute. If you're looking for a team a little off the grid, I'll go with them for this week.
Yep, I like that off the grid look, and I do think that out there in the Sun Belt, there's going to be a lot of intrigue in that conference, as that's a conference where we've seen teams literally go from worst to first. So there's always a lot of, shall we say, hoopla out there, and I love the look on UW Milwaukee as well. And one of our best looks on this podcast is getting you aboard, Rocco, because you do such a great job taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. You're doing a great job on the scheduling front, but on top of that, I know you're just doing a great job in general of getting set for what is going to be a great season. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I've got an exciting next week ahead. I'm going to be heading out Monday to the great city of Greenville, South Carolina. Never been before, and I'll be there in time for Tuesday, noon Eastern, start of a long media day with all the SoCon teams. So I'm really excited. I've been looking at that league closely throughout scheduling. Also meeting with several of the staffs. Out of the staffs I haven't met, I'm very excited to meet them in person as we do SoCon Media. That'll be Tuesday, noon Eastern, and I'll have coverage throughout my website, bracketeer.org, as well as a lot of Twitter updates. And my goal is to meet with all 10 head coaches out there. It's one of my favorite leagues, and based on being a West Coast guy, I obviously don't get to see them as much as I would like to. So this will be a great opportunity not only to meet with every head coach, but also at least one player from each team. And that's going to kick off a big week of media days. We'll have Big Ten Media Day, I believe, on the 3rd, which is, I believe, Thursday. Not sure if I'm going to be able to get there in person, but certainly be covering that, following that closely. Media days can get really monotonous for a fan. But I think the value I'm trying to uncover here, any kind of recent injury information, any kind of personnel surprises, like so-and-so starting when we expected him not even to be a contributor. So I'll be asking all those good questions to try to get to the bottom of that for all of you and your audience. We'll have a good time with it.
And that's what we want to hear, because with a lot of those media days, you're always going to get the coach being like, oh, I love my team. And any coach that says anything other than that, that's when the news really does come in. Because it's very rare where a coach is like, yeah, we're going to go over in the league this year. We're just hoping to have some good time and get some orange slices at the end of the game. That's not something that you expect to hear, but certainly being able to figure out that injury information, being able to see these guys up close and in person is so valuable, and a man that provides so much value to all of us that love college basketball is Rocco. So big thanks to him for joining me on Cuts Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Cuts Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at unit_D1. Keep in mind, largely, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, rain or shine, all 366 days, because it is a leap year this year. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow, as we are about 5.5 weeks from the start of the college basketball season. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.